today we have a great guest with us. Joil Marbut and his family have become friends to me in this church for many, many years ago. It's probably almost 25 years ago that I took my first trip to Ecuador. And when we were in Ecuador, there was a young intern there on the roof, and he was plugging away there, and he and I got a chance to meet. And now over, like I said, almost 25 years, he and I have become friends. This church is partnered with his father-in-law and then with him in the Hope House, which is a girls' house right there in Socua, Ecuador. Joel has become a personal friend of mine, and anytime we have the opportunity for him to come and share with our church, we take advantage of it. So he's in Panama early this week, and he flew up here late last night, and we said, Joel, we want you to just come and just speak to our congregation, challenge our congregation, share with them what God has put on your heart, and really share with them kind of the heart of missions. And those of you who've experienced Joel before, you know him, you love him, and we're so thankful to have him back. He represents one of the many missionaries. This church supports about 50-plus missionaries and ministries around the world. And we do that by going, we do that by praying, we do that by giving. And at the end of this service, you'll have an opportunity to give. Our ushers will be at the door, and that offering goes to missionaries like Joel. But here's this. We believe so much in the idea of missions and stewardship that every single time you give a gift to this church, our church tithes 10% of that gift, and we give to missions because we believe that it's the heart of God to reach the world, not just here, but around the world. And Joel is a part of that, and we're a part of him, and we're so thankful that he's here. So could you join me in welcoming and giving a Coastal Community Church welcome to missionary Joil Marbut.
Hey. Thank you guys so much. It's such a privilege to be with you. And Chrisfield, right? Isn't that right? Yeah, I just do want to let you guys know that the camera adds 40 pounds in 20 years. I'm a lot skinnier and younger. I don't know about Brian, but I'm a lot skinnier and younger than I'm looking right now on camera. So what's crazy is, first of all and foremost, for those who know me and my wife and my kids, my 4 kids, they absolutely positively adore you guys. I have to travel all the time. And my kids just, I'm going to go, they give a rip about where I'm going, right? I mean, for real. Like, I come back, I'll be gone. A couple is like, oh, you were gone? Like, where you been? And so, realistically, what was crazy is my kids never complain or never say anything until they found out I was coming here. And I have to admit, but it's not the boardwalk. And it's not the beach, and it's not the attractions. The reason this place for us is special is because there's part of our family here, and we just dearly love you guys. And I can't say much more. That's not like putting it on real thick or anything else. But you know what? You guys have for so many years now. I mean, naturally, I met you. You were a young, sarcastic pastor. Now you're just sarcastic. Yeah. And what is crazy, what is so crazy though, is the relationship that's been netted over the years and the memories. It's crazy. And I'm not going to go down this path because I got a point that I have to make this morning. But some of the greatest memories I think we've had on the mission field have come when you guys were in Ecuador, and just beautiful stories and being a part of our story. And so from my entire family, my wife and my 4 kids, thank you guys so much. Now, I moved to Ecuador when I was single. You met me when I was single. And I moved to Ecuador, and what was crazy is when I had been in Ecuador just a few months, my boss came to me and he said, hey, I grew up on a farm, and so I had an intention of becoming an athlete. I was going to go to college. I had everything planned out. I was going to be a civil engineer. I had my entire life in order, and it was like God goes, ha, 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 let's throw a wrench in everything. You're not going to go to the college you thought you were going to do. You're not going to play the sport you thought you were going to play. You're not going to study what you think you're going to do. As a matter of fact, let me tell you how funny God is. My 10th grade year, I walked into a Spanish class in high school, and I turned right back around, and I walked out, And I went to the guidance counselor, and I said, I will never need to speak Spanish. Give me another math class, okay? And God goes, ha, 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 ha. Don't tell me never. And so what's crazy, I moved to Ecuador in 1998. And when I got there, I started working for this missionary. And at the end of the day, he came to me one time and he sent me on a trip. And he put me on a bus. And I'm like, hey, I can make this happen. I can do anything. He put me on a bus, 15 hours on a bus without the bus ever stopping one time. That gave an incredible understanding. Do you ever wonder where the term rolling hills came from? It's when you're riding in a bus for 15 hours and there's no bathroom breaks because people go to the bathroom in the bus. And I remember this thing just like, the further down, like you'd hold your feet up, you're like, everything's running in the floor. And we get out, and I'm thinking, dear God, I don't know where I am, but I'm getting off now. And we got off the bus, and when we got out of the bus, it was like breathing oxygen for the first time and walking. And I think this is the end of the trip. Ha, 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 ha. God says, no, the trip is just starting. Because we went from there, and I said, how are we going to make this trip? They said, oh, we're going to take horses. Well, the deal is, if you have ever been to Ecuador, you realize that I'm kind of big for the Ecuadorian demographic, right? I'm like the biggest, hairiest man God has ever created when they see me. And so we go out and we get on horses, and when they come to the horses, they're kind of a mixed breed between a Shetland pony and a big dog, right? So I get on the horse and I take off, and I'm riding on the horse and I'm riding through the jungle, and I'm hearing the people behind me. And as we're riding down this trail, all of a sudden, I hear people behind me, and they are dying laughing. I mean, they're laughing like as if you walked out of the bathroom, you got toilet paper stuck to the bottom of your foot, and everybody's like, ha, like, look at this. And this is rough. They're laughing hysterically. And I turned around and said, what is wrong with you? They said, you're so huge. Every time you come to a mud puddle, you pick the horse up like this, and you carry him across the water. And so, even when I had gotten on the mission field, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, and that wasn't it. I had no intention at all of riding horses. I had no intention at all of being out in the middle of the jungle, but we're riding down this path, and we rode for the next 7 days, going from village after village after village, and only 2 of those villages had believers in them. And it blew my mind because I'm sitting there looking at an incredible entire part of the world that has been untouched with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Village after village after village. And then all of a sudden, the last day, I'm thinking, thank God I'm done. Because on top of it being a big dog that I was riding, I had a saddle with no stirrups. And it was wood, and it had no cushioning on it. And I'm just riding, I'm wedged on this thing, and I am miserable. I am so saddle sore, I can't even sit down. I'm not kidding. I get off the horse, I would lay face down. And miserable. So 6 days, 7 days of this, and all of a sudden we're riding down this mountain of a pig trail, and all of the natives are coming out because, look, it's like the circus. Look at this big, giant guy. It's like Sasquatch riding a dog, right? You would come out for that. I'm not positive, but I think you would. Some of you have even paid to see stuff like that, okay? and so all of a sudden, you're riding through, and all of the natives are coming out, and they're coming out, and we rode into the last village, and I can see the end in sight. I'm ready to disengage. I'm ready to move on with my life. I'm ready to go to my plans. I'm ready to go and find what I had in my mind would be the answer for everything in my life. And all of a sudden, as I'm riding into that village, I come into contact with these 3 elderly ladies who are weeping. And they're crying tears of joy, and they can't hug me enough. And when I stood there, I looked at them and I said, I'm sorry, can you tell me what you're crying about? And they said, you don't understand that we've been praying for over 30 years. We became believers when we were little girls, and our family sold us as brides to this village when we were 8 and 9 years old. And we have been far away from the church. We can't read, we can't write, we don't even have a Bible, but we have been praying for over 30 years that God would send a missionary to our community. And I have to admit, I didn't think I was the answer. Can I even make another confession? I really didn't want to be the answer. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, somebody has studied the anthropology. Somebody actually likes riding horses or big dogs. Somebody likes eating bugs and grub worms and drinking fermented spit and doing all of these amazing things that we get to do on a cultural basis. There's someone who wants to sweat every day of their ever-loving life, and it's not me. And you know, that night, I walked back into the hut that I was sleeping in, and I was crying out to God, and I was praying Luke 10:2, God, send laborers into the harvest field. God, let someone answer this need and this cry right now. And you know what God did? He asked me a question. Have you gotten into a place in your relationship with God where you're intimate enough that He actually asks you questions? Because if you haven't, then you haven't gone far enough. And you know what I found out is the questions that offend our mind reveal our heart. And so that day on November of 1998, God asked me a question. And He said, if you don't, then who will? If you don't do it. If you don't answer this need right now, who is going to do it? And I wrestled, and guess what? There was not an emotional response. There was not a feel-good moment. There was not a fairy that appeared on the wall or an image of Jesus in a potato chip to confirm anything that I had seen. But I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that at that moment when I said, okay, God, I'll do it, that God was pleased. God was incredibly pleased. So what was crazy is down the road just a piece, I ended up meeting my wife on the mission field. And any of you guys like the Hallmark movie? Right. You notice I said the Hallmark movie. There is one movie with 300 actors and 2 sets, and they just keep rotating them over. And you know what's crazy? My wife's like, hey, let's watch this Hallmark movie. And I'm like, dude, he's falling in love with her, she's going to die, and then he's going to marry her sister, and I'll just save 2.5 hours, okay? I'm good. I'm all right. So this is my Hallmark movie moment, and I'd been in Ecuador since 1998. In the year 2000, my boss had a daughter that finished university, and she came back to Ecuador. She called her dad, and she said, Dad, I want to come back to Ecuador. I want to come home. She'd been raised on the mission field, and when she came in to Ecuador, she actually arrived January of 2000, and when she arrived, she had a house back in Louisville, Kentucky. She had a house, she had a job, and she had a boyfriend. And then she got to look at this. I'm just saying. And she sold the house, quit the job, dumped the guy, asked me to marry her. We got married. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, all right? We met in January. I asked her to marry me in March. We got married in July, and that was 22 years ago. And God's blessed us with a phenomenal, incredible, wonderful family of 4 children. And what's crazy is God put into our heart to move to an area of the country that was called a missionary graveyard. Nobody else wanted to be there. And we moved out there. We moved our entire family, and we started working. And what's crazy is in 2006, we were really good at what we were doing. We were really good. Any of you, I mean, you just do things. There's certain things. I don't know if you knew this, but like scientists say that 50 to 90% of everything we do, think, and say is habit. Did you know that? Like 90, think about it, 50, they agree at 50, and it goes all the way to 90% of everything you do, you think, and you say is based on habit. And we got in the habit of planting churches and pastoring churches and raising up leaders. And we were really good at our habit. And then all of a sudden in 2006, there was a little girl that was dropped on our doorstep. And that little girl was dropped on her doorstep with this word spoke in August of 2006. This is my daughter. Her father told me not to bring her home. And if you won't take her in right now, then I'm going to take her to the market and I'm going to sell her. And I remember at that moment, I'm thinking to myself, I am a church planner, right? I don't need another kid. Anybody have kids? A lot of kids? Yeah? The reason I have 4 kids is because I don't want 5, okay? And anybody that has 3 kids, if you want to know what 4 kids is like, it's like you're drowned in, and then somebody hands you a kid. I'm not kidding. I think I cried when I found out we were pregnant with everyone. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. And then all of a sudden, here's another kid dropped on our doorstep. And then what happens? God taught me an eternal lesson. Some of you men understand this quote. Somebody, I don't know, out of their infinite wisdom said something, wrote it on a bathroom stall or did something, and they said, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Some of you men can't say amen, but just raise your eyebrow, okay? But in 2006, I found out that heaven hath no ally like a woman inspired. And my wife got inspired because we found out the percentages. 85% of the little girls in our province are sexually abused before they're 12. And we found out it's 40% of the girls before they're 16 are either pregnant or have a kid. And that we have the highest level of mothers under the age of 12. And my mom and my wife started bringing these girls in. So all of a sudden, it's like 1 girl, 2. It's like, dude, we don't know what we're doing. We don't even know what we're doing with our own kids. Now we got more kids. And what are we going to do with this? And I remember when we made the decision to start the girls' home, she made a call to me. And she said, we have to start a girls' home. And I'm telling her, I'm like, we don't have the money to do this. She said, well, we've got $500. I said, $500? We can rent a house. At the time, we had 4 kids, 4 girls. We can hire a lady. She goes, well, $500 is enough for 1 month, the first month. We were going to rent a facility. We were going to give a lady a job that needed a place to live, and we were going to take these girls in, and we took that step. You know, and when we took that step, what was crazy is the very next day, I got a phone call. Back in those days, we didn't have cell phones in Ecuador, and somebody was frantically looking to make contact with me, and they said, I need to talk to Joil Marbut in Ecuador, and they're calling, and they're sending emails, and they're doing all this stuff, and I called this guy. I have no clue who he was. And when I call him, he says, listen, you spoke at my church like 4 years ago, and God told me today to write you a check for so many thousands of dollars. Can you tell me what it's for? And that man wrote 1 check that underwrote the girls' home for the first 2 years of the Ecuador Hope House to be around. And I tell you that today because with all due respect, I was telling Pastor Brian, I preach all the time. God's given us an incredible platform to be able to go around and speak and do all this stuff. But for some reason today, God woke me up. I'm on very little sleep. And God woke me up really early this morning because He brought me here to give you a message. And all I want to do, don't worry, I'm not going to pull out like, a crystal ball or do anything weird, okay? But all I want to ask you to do, whether you're watching on through video or you're here present with me right now, would you do me a massive favor and just say a really quick prayer that's in the Old Testament with me? And this is the prayer. Lord, speak. I'm listening. Just pray that prayer with me right now, because I don't know who I'm here to talk to right now, but I'm going to share something. And don't worry, we're not going to go off the rails. But would you just trust that God wants to speak to you today? And if I'm talking to you, just raise your hands toward heaven very simply. You don't have to raise them up high. You don't even have to raise your hands. Just close your eyes and say this prayer with me. Lord, speak, I'm listening. Just very simply, Lord, speak, I'm listening. God, we put this time into your hands, and we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're going to do something amazing. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I want to take you, if you have your Bibles, if you don't, you're okay. I want to take you to the book of Mark, Mark chapter 8. In Mark chapter 8, I'm going to read a couple of verses, and I'm going to let you see what God's taught me through our process. What God's taught me through our process. And when we look at Mark chapter 8, verse 22 through 26, I think we have that, right? And very, very common story, right? So Jesus comes into Bethesda. He comes into Bethesda, and when he comes in, it says that they brought out a blind man to him. They brought him to the city. And what happened is the man came to Jesus. It says he took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Do not even go back into the village." Now, when I look at this story, what's crazy is I don't know what's going on in your life or what's happening, but I know what I know, and I know that the Lord is wanting me to share from this text today, which I usually don't do, and that's why I have these incredibly complicated notes written out on loaned out yellow legal pad, okay? But when we look at this story, there's 4 incredible occurrences in a row right here in the story that just tell a phenomenal story that apply to us right now where we are, sitting right where we are, and in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. First and foremost, what we have to understand is this whole story starts out of pain and cries. Now, I don't know who they were, but it says they brought this blind man to Jesus. We don't even know who they were. We don't know what their names were, but somebody heard the cry and brought it to the attention of Jesus Christ. Somebody heard the pain that was being cried out for. And you know what's crazy is so many times in our world we live in such insulated existence that we try our best to get away from the noise of pain. We build gates around our community. We build walls around our houses. We move further and further away from where the pain is. And I understand that. We want security. We want safety. We want to be able to walk up and down the streets. But so many times we're living our lives not isolated from pain, but insulated from pain. And it's like there's multiple layers of things that we put between us and the pain that is existing around us. And what we have to understand is when somebody cries out in pain, when somebody has a need that they can't meet, and some of you have been there before. Some of you have pulled up to a gas station before and you didn't have the money in your pocket to put gas in your car, and all you knew to do was just cry out to God. Some of you have walked into your home and you didn't have the food in the shelves to feed your kids, and the only thing you knew to do was to cry out to God and hope that somebody would listen. Some of you have been in a situation where the only thing you didn't know how you were going to put Christmas underneath the tree at Christmas time. And all you knew to do was to cry out. Just like that mom that took a shot and she showed up on our doorstep. And you know what? She didn't know the answer when her husband said, "Don't come home with our daughter." But she took a shot that she was going to cry out and somebody was going to have compassion on her. And so see, this story starts out in compassion. And what's crazy is so many times we think that prayers go unanswered. So many times we think that somehow the cries of those who are suffering, not only in our own community, but around the world, are somehow falling on deaf ears in God's throne. But what's crazy is the Bible tells us somehow, some way, God is close to a broken and a contrite heart. There's something supernatural that takes place when there's pain involved in the life of other people. And maybe I don't understand the concepts that are in heaven that are taking place between. There are a lot of people that'll tell you, hey, this is the way. All you have to do is if you'll do A and B and C, then God's going to answer your prayer. They're lying to you. But I've been a Christian for a long time, and I've read a lot of books, and I've heard a lot of sermons. And there is no A, B, and C to rubbing Jesus' belly and getting what you want. But somehow, somewhere, somebody heard this cry. And you know what's crazy is I want to pause really quick. Because when we hear the cries of other people, we really only have four responses, right? The first response is a spiritual response, right? God bless them, or maybe even from the south, bless your heart. I mean, that can have a negative connotation even up here, right? There's a second response. It's a financial response. It means that we see a need that we can respond to and we can make a difference in, and maybe they don't even have to know that we did something. We just know that we have the means and we can respond to it. The third response, though, is the one that more and more people don't want to take, and it's a physical response. Somehow through our insulation, we feel that sometimes we just don't have to respond physically. Now, what am I saying here? What I'm saying here is if you find a hungry kid, bless your heart, and $5 doesn't always cut it. What I'm saying is when there's abuse, when there are people being taken advantage of, it's not enough to pass the buck to another day and say, well, hopefully somebody's going to do something. There comes a time in our life where we have to respond, because the fourth response is just disobedience to God. Because one thing I've found out as a believer is when we're faced by needs and we're faced by pain, guess what? The one thing that we're not allowed to do, the one thing we're not allowed to do is nothing. To be indifferent. So somebody else is going to pick it up. Somebody else is going to do something about it. See, I remember this story. It took place in the middle of the jungle one day. I was walking into a village, and I walked into a village, opened up a door to a village that had never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I'm walking through the village. I wasn't even going to stop in the village, and I heard a mother crying. And what's weird is the culture and the people we live with and have worked with for so many years, when you hear a mother mourn, they have a song that they sing when they bury their children. And I heard a mother mourning, and I heard this, and it's the most eerie sound I've ever heard in my life, this wailing and this lamenting, and I'm hearing a mother mourning the death of her child, and all of a sudden my heart went out, and I started moving off the path toward a hut, and I started walking toward a hut, and as I got closer to a hut, I walked upon a man, and that man was digging 3 separate graves for his 3 children that had died from meningitis. He had the first grave dug, but he couldn't even see straight because he was weeping. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at the guy, and he's about 3 shovels into grave number 2, and the bodies are wrapped in sheets, sitting out in broad daylight, baking in the sun. And the reason why is because nobody in the village would come and help him because everyone was afraid. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there looking at a situation, and guess what? $5 and a God bless you didn't change nothing, and that would change nothing in the life of that man. And all of a sudden I had to respond and I had to do something about it. I remember that day I jumped in a ditch, I pushed him out of the way, and I started digging the hole, staying there beside him. And I dug the next 2 holes, and I'm sitting there. He's sitting there weeping with his wife. And I told him, I said, just stay back, I'll do it. I pulled him in the grave. I started burying it up. And he looked at me. And all of a sudden, he had never heard the name of Jesus Christ, but I guarantee you, Jesus Christ knew his name. And his cries and his prayers and his pain had reached the throne of God. And somehow, some way, 20 years before, God had prepared a roughneck farm kid and brought him from the United States to the middle of the jungle, not to walk past and be indifferent, but to respond. So when we look at this text, the first thing is this: God uses us to advocate for others. And He wants to use you right now, wherever you are, no matter what your circumstances are, to respond to the cries of other people. The second thing is this. This is the most politically incorrect story in the entire New Testament. Because Jesus takes a blind man and He leads him out of town. I want you to wrap your head around this. The only thing that a blind person can be comfortable with is what they know. They walk into their house, right? It's crazy. Have you ever walked into a person's house that was fully on blind, and they don't even have lights in their house? And they know where everything is. They got like couch, chair, table. And I remember one time I'm walking through a house, and I'm falling over everything. And they're walking all the way around it. And they're counting the steps, and they know how many steps it is across this thing, and they know how to get here, and they know how to get there. And I want you to see this. This man had lived his entire life in the same town, and he knew the streets of his town. He knew how many steps it was from his front door to the corner where he begged. He knew how many steps it was from there where he could go buy some bread. He knew how many steps it was from there over to the next place. And the people in the town cared enough about the guy that they're the ones that brought him to Jesus. They knew him and they took care of him. And this guy is walking around, and guess what? Even in his blindness, he became comfortable. And here comes Jesus. He says, nope. You know, I can't do what I'm wanting to do in your life inside of your comfort zone. So all of a sudden, Jesus took him by the hand and He led him out of his comfort zone. He took him out of town. This is brutal. You would put someone in jail that did this right now. If there was a blind person that walked daily up and down the boardwalk and everybody knew him and everybody was beloved, imagine if they piled him up in the car and took him to Baltimore and dropped him off. And you're like, dude, where's Bob? We dropped him in Baltimore. You did what? Yeah, downtown, don't worry. And Jesus pulls him out of his comfort zone. And He puts him in a place where he's not comfortable. And somehow or some way, the crux of what I'm trying to share today is this. There's somebody that's listening to me right now, and God's pushing you out of your comfort zone. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, our pain is God's megaphone. Because, see, you can deny the blessing, but you cannot deny pain. Do you know what God will do in your life? God will put a rock in your shoe. Have any of you ever had a rock in your shoe? Now let me ask you a question. Did you leave it there? I mean, have you ever been walking and just been like, dude, there's something in my shoe, and then you take it off and say, oh, there it is, and just put it right back on? I just want to know what that was. No, I've identified it. Our pain demands attention. And so God pulls this guy out of his comfort zone, and he brings pressure so he can speak to him. I have no clue why. But that is the main reason I'm sharing this morning, is because someone that's listening to this is becoming extremely uncomfortable in their situation. And the reason you're becoming extremely uncomfortable is because God is trying to do something in your life. He's trying to do something eternal. And He doesn't want you just to keep going. He wants you to stop and see what the pain's about. He wants you to slow down long enough that you take off your shoe and you see what's causing the pressure inside of your life. You know, it's crazy. A lot of people would say, like, I don't really believe that God speaks. Let me tell you something. You ride a horse through the Amazon jungle with no stirrups for 7 days, you will hear the voice of God. Because all of a sudden, God gets you to a place where you're so far out of your comfort zone, so far out of yourself, so far out of all the insulation that you put in your life, all the barriers and all the walls and all the things like that. And the next thing you know, you're raw, and God is screaming through a megaphone at you and telling you something has to change. Something has to change. So God gets us on the edge of our comfort zone. I hope one day God tells you to do this to somebody, Brian, just to spit on them. I would tell you what, that would cut down on frivolous prayer time, wouldn't it? You better know that you need God to heal you, because you're going to get spit on when you go up front, right? And what's crazy, I mean, spit in our culture is like bad, but in Jesus' time, it was like the worst insult in the world. It was the lowest of the low. It was the worst thing you could do to another person on the planet. And here's Jesus politically incorrect, dragging a blind guy out of his comfort zone to get him to the edge of the town, to get him out of the place he had always been comfortable in. And the next thing he does is he uses completely unorthodox circumstances to do something supernatural in his life. Like send a missionary to your church the week before Thanksgiving. Like a song on the radio that just keeps playing. Like a friend you haven't heard from in years that all of a sudden reconnects with you. Where you find a shoebox full of pictures of things that God had done in your life beforehand, or memories or books or journals or whatever the thing is, just something completely unorthodox. A conversation in the foyer of your church. A situation in the parking lot at a Walmart. Just something completely unorthodox that flips your entire world upside down. God got this man to the very edge of the town so he could do a deeper work in his life. And what happened? Did it happen instantaneous? That's why I love this story. Somehow we think that there's a magic spiritual pill that if we'll just come up and respond, that everything will fall into place. And I believe in responding, and I believe in prayer, and I believe in all those things. But somehow we discount that God is a God of process. And right now, He's working continually through process. And the only way we lose is if we step out of His process. We tap out of it. So all of a sudden, Jesus touches the guy. After He spits on him, He touches him. And what happens? He sees part of it. He sees part of it. If I had to guess and just do statistics around the church, I would say there's a vast majority of people inside of this church that are listening to me right now, and you almost get it. You almost get it. There's been a place in your life where you've allowed Jesus to come in so far. There's just so far, and you almost get it, but it's just not quite clear. It's not quite there. It's not quite across the line. Your commitment level is better than above average, but it's just above average, right? Now, I know there's enough people in here that are in my age demographic that if Jesus was up here healing eyes, you'd let him spit on you. Like, I don't have money to pay for LASIK, right? And you say, touch me as many times as you need to because I want to see again. But what we're talking about is on a spiritual level. You have to understand this man allowed Jesus to do it again because he wanted everything he had promised. Everything he promised. Not just a halfway point. Not just stories, not just pictures, but full life transformation. And the final thing right here, what's crazy? So Jesus does his work, and you know what Jesus told him? Don't go back to your comfort zone. Raise your hand if you got kids. Yeah. Okay, now help me out because I just want to know that I'm not a bad. Have any of you helped your kids clean their bedroom? Everybody. Oh, God. Like, go clean your room, and it's like, yeah, right. Yeah, right. But have you ever cleaned your kid's room and then you've worked, you've wasted a day of your life going through your kid's junk. You've put it all in order, and 24 hours later, there is I don't know. I hope there's medals in heaven for not killing your kids. I think I'm going to get like one of the big ones. So here it is. Jesus touches this guy. He brings him to this place. Everything's being changed in his life. And the next thing you know, when everything clears up and makes sense, Jesus says, don't allow yourself to drift back into your comfort zone. Don't allow yourself to get pulled back to the place that you've spent so many years trying to get out of. Just because it's the easiest thing to do. Would you stand up on your feet? You know, somehow we spend our entire lives as believers hedging our bets on two things. Being happy and being comfortable. And I have to make a massive confession. I've read this so many times I've lost count. Pastor Brian is a lot smarter than I am, and I'm going to tell you something. You probably know where this is, but I haven't found the verse that says, I have come that you might be happy. I haven't seen it where Jesus said, blessed are the comfortable. We spend our entire lives trying to insulate ourselves and make ourselves more happy and more comfortable, when the only thing God wants from us is just obedience. God's not going to judge us according to how successful we were. He's only going to judge us according to how obedient we've been. How obedient we've been to the pain He's placed in our lives. How we've responded to the pain in the lives of other people. That's it. God puts pain, lets us see the pain of other people's lives. You know why? Because He wants us to do something about it. Not be indifferent. He wants to use you to do something that you don't even know that you know how to do. He wants to use you to respond to someone's cry and need that's arising to His throne right now. And it may be a need right here in Ocean City, or it may be a need that's in the middle of Africa. But trust me, people that you don't even know their name and they don't even know Jesus' name, Jesus knows their name, and their prayers are getting up to heaven. Those cries of people that are crying out in their pain are getting there. They're just waiting on somebody to respond. And then some of you, God's put a rock in your shoe. I'm not getting away from that. And you've been walking, somebody has been walking for months, if not years, with a rock in their shoe. And it's time for you to stop and tell God, okay, God, what's this pain about? What are you trying to do here? What are you trying to say to me? I'm going to invite you to close your eyes where you are. And I know this may be a bit unorthodox this morning. But wherever you're standing right now, I just want you to open up your heart and your mind to the Lord. And I want you to allow the Holy Spirit to speak to you. Remember, we prayed that prayer, God, speak, we're listening. And in your listening this morning, if God has touched your heart, there's either a pain from someone else or there's a pain in your own life. And God's saying, hey, it's time to pay some attention to that. If I'm talking with you right now and the Lord is speaking to you, I'm not going to ask you to take any other step. I want you to raise your hand toward heaven. Nobody's looking around. I see your hand. Keep your hand up. Keep your hand up. I see it. Raise your hand. Just says, you know what, God, keep your hand up. If God's speaking to you, dozens of people, raise your hand. Keep it up. Keep it up if you don't mind. And if you raise your hand right now, I want you to, if you didn't raise your hand, keep your eyes closed. I want you to look at me. If you raised your hand, look at me. I see you. God sees you. He knows your situation, your circumstance. He sees you. He knows. He knows what's going on. He knows why your hand's up. He knows. He knows. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, He knows. He sees it and He knows it. He knows it. He knows it. You can put your hand down. Now we're going to pray a prayer today together. It's very, very simple. If you're so inclined, would you just pray with me, Lord? Lead me out of my comfort. Lead me out of my comfort so you can do in my life what you're trying to do. I put my plans, I put my comfort, I put my ideas into your hands. And I trust you. I trust you. I trust you. Father, thank you for your presence in this place today, and thank you for this opportunity. God, whoever this was for, specifically those who receive this, pray that it will bring forth fruit. God, that it would be transformational and life-changing. In Jesus' name.